Hello everybody, this is Kozatsakas and this is your 18th tutorial in Photoshop. In this tutorial I'm going to introduce the Curves tool. And the Curves tool is actually a really advanced tool for editing your photos. It's used by a lot of professional photographers to do photo editing, and it has been misunderstood by a lot of Photoshop users just because it's a little bit harder to grasp than any usual tool, and you're going to need a little bit of guidance over there. You can't actually figure out what it does on your own, but I hope that by the end of this tutorial you will be able to actually use this, fully utilize this tool for your own editing purposes without anybody else's guidance. You'll be able to master the tool on your own. So I'll try to make this tutorial as simple as possible so that you will be able to follow along. Now, to open this tool, you have to go on Image, Adjustments, and Curves. And this is the Curves tool. Now, what it does is basically over here at the bottom you have the levels of your histogram that you see on the image over here, and it corresponds those to actually new levels by using this line over here, and you can create your own curves. And we're gonna see analytically how it works at the end of the tutorial on our blackboard. So I hope you'll actually get that, but I hope you actually have the basics by then. And well, let's just see what it does in general terms. First of all, over here at our histogram we have our shadows. Over here, this side of the histogram represents the shadows as always, and over here we represent the highlights. So what happens is when you move this line, you can actually create control points and push and drag this line. You can delete control points and create your own curve. And whenever you move this line above the diagonal line over here, you get brighter pixels, just as you saw in the image. And whenever you move it under this diagonal line, you get darker pixels. And so let's just delete this control point by dragging it out of the box. Now what you can do is whenever you go over the image, you see this eyedropper tool, and you can actually click on the image, and as you see, this little circle pops up that actually allows you to create a control point at the pixel that you're sampling right now. So if you just move around, you can see the circle moving around the image, and this basically represents the pixel that you're on. And if you just control click on the pixel, you can see that a control point was created over here on this diagonal line. Now let's just create another control point at some shadowy area, and that would be about here, maybe over here. And as you can see, we now have two control points. Now let's just drag one of them a little bit to this side and the other one a little bit to this side. And what we did basically is we increased the contrast of this image. And why did this happen? Remember when I said at the beginning of the tutorial that this side represents the shadows and this side represents the highlights? Well, what we did is we dragged on this side, we dragged the line a little bit under the diagonal. So what that did is it basically made the shadows even darker, because as we said, when you drag the line under the diagonal, you make the pixels darker, and we dragged the other half of the line over the diagonal line, so we made the highlights that are represented over here even more highlighted. So we made this contrast between the shadows and the highlights by intensifying the shadows and the highlights. And this actually created this contrast on the image. And how this is called is a traditional S-line, and it is used by a lot of professional photographers to increase the contrast of their image. Now, let's just do a little trick about this S-line. The trick is that the more you actually drag those points, the steeper this line becomes. The more the contrast on the image is, the steeper this line is, the more the contrast on your image is. And as you can see, that's pretty obvious on the image. Now, if you just move these points to the other side, just like that, as you see, you get quite a weird image. And why is that? This is basically because over here, where you're, let's just make that a little bit more obvious, you get a flat point. And what a flat point basically means, it's no contrast. And if I were to actually, let's just do that. If I were to actually drag the first point, the start point, and the end point, let's just remove those 2 points. Over here, as you can see, we get a gray image, and there's no contrast to this image. Well, it's the same idea, the same concept whenever you have this flat point over here. Now let's just create this flat point again. Sorry, let's just drag this, yeah. So whenever you get this flat points, you actually want to avoid those just because you get no contrast on your image, and you want to avoid them at all costs. You don't want to have any flat points just because they destroy your image. Now, another thing you don't want to have are downhills, just like this one. This is called the downhill, because what that basically does is it creates a negative of the image for part of the image, just like this. And you don't usually want to have that. And why it creates that negative, we'll see right now. And if I just move the start point up top and the end point on the bottom, you can see we have a negative of this image. Well, it's the same exact idea whenever you have a downhill. Let's just make the downhill again, just like that. And this downhill basically created an inverted of this image for a portion of the image. So that's why you don't want to have downhills usually. Now, another tool before we go on the blackboard and explain why all of this happens that I want to show you is this tool. And this is the pencil tool basically. And you can actually use this tool to draw your own line and actually set each point with this pencil tool. You can actually draw your own line, as I said. And, well, you can do that if you want to, but I usually suggest using this curves tool. And as you see, using this pencil actually made a lot of points over here, and it actually made a lot of anchor points on this side. Now if you just want to remove all of those, you can hold down the Alt key, and what that's going to do is it's going to set the cancel button to the reset button, and if you just click on it, it's just going to reset everything. Now this trick works on most windows on Photoshop, so if you just want to reset all of the options, you can hold down the Alt key and press on the cancel button, which will be turned to a reset button, and reset all of the options. So the important thing to remember from this is, in order to increase the contrast, you just have to make this S curve, and whenever you move the line above the diagonal, you get brighter pixels, and whenever you move the line under the diagonal, you get darker pixels. Just keep that in mind. Now let's just go to our blackboard. I'll just close that, and let's just go to our blackboard over here, and I'll get my point better once we go to the blackboard. Now, let me just get some color and let's just draw. Now this is the diagonal line that comes up when you first open the curves tool, and when you see this diagonal line, nothing changes on the image, everything stays the same. So why is that? Well, at the start of the tutorial I said that this line represents a correspondence between the current levels and the new levels, and if the current levels start from 0 over here and end on 255 over here, let me just draw that on the new levels over here. So what that does is, let me just draw that over here. I just want to end with it, so let's just draw it quite fast. So what that basically does is, whenever let's just say here was 60, okay? And here was 60. So why does nothing change? Well, it's basically because what you're saying is, okay, I want you to convert all of the levels that are 60 right now, the current levels that are 60 right now over here, to 60 over here. And the same applies to this. If you just took a line anywhere, basically, you just correspond that to a new level that's at the same point. If this was like whatever, it was like 100, this would be 100 on this side as well. So nothing actually changes on the image, just because you're actually corresponding its level to itself. Now what happens when we have this curve? And I'm sorry I added this extra point, we didn't need that. So I'll let you see what happens, and I'll write this down. Now what happens is, let's just look at this 60 over here, and let's just look where that corresponds. Okay, if we just made an arrow over here, you'll see that the 60 basically, if we go on this side, corresponds to about 40. And that is due to the S curve. So what that did is it actually lowered the level. And lower levels, if you remember, mean darker pixels. And let me write those two things down. I just want to write them down. Higher levels. And you'll remember that from the RGB color model tutorial, where I said that higher levels basically mean brighter colors. As you get closer to 255 brighter colors, you actually get more highlights, more bright colors. Highlights. So as you go to higher levels, as you go towards 255, you get more highlights, and that's why this area represents the highlights, because it's closer to 255. Now the lower levels, and let me write this down, lower levels means darker colors, or more shadows. So what we have right here as you can see, is we correspond 60 to 40. So we correspond this level to a lower level, to 40. So what that did is it made all of the pixels that had a level of 60 to a darker level of 40. And I repeated that a couple of times. I hope you got that by now. So all of those pixels that actually get a lower value are over here at our shadows. So that's why the shadows become even more shadowy, because this area gets lower levels than it had, so it actually becomes darker. And the exact opposite is true for this area. And if I just drew an arrow from this side, this was about 190, I guess, over here. Where would this arrow correspond to right now? Let me just draw it over here. Well, what you would get is, I don't know, this is probably about 210 if here's 190. So basically what happened is we got a higher value for the pixels that had a level of 190, and this actually applies to all of those pixels along this part of the line, so of the curve. So basically a higher levels means a brighter color. So what happened is we told Photoshop to actually increase the level of this highlights, and what that did is it made the highlights even brighter. So that's why whenever you move this line, under the diagonal that you see over here, whenever you move it under the diagonal, you get darker pixels. That is because you correspond the current levels to lower levels. And whenever you move it on top of that diagonal, you just get brighter pixels because you correspond the current levels to higher levels. So that's the idea behind it. Now I know this has been quite a difficult tutorial for you to follow, and it's actually a little bit of a hard tool to grasp, so feel free to actually post any questions on YouTube as a comment, and I'll try to answer a lot of them, and I'll be more than happy to do that. So by then, see you guys next time, and I hope you enjoyed the tutorial.